Okay, tonight, we're going back to a place that looked like paradise on the surface. A small Pennsylvania town where the air smelled of cut grass, birthday cake, and trust. A place that believed nothing truly bad could ever happen there. But on June 14th, 1977, that illusion cracked. Somewhere between 4:15 and 4:45 p.m., a 3-year-old girl vanished without a sound. No scream, no struggle, just absence, pure and unexplainable. Her name was Emma Rose Harrison, and for 44 years, her disappearance haunted this quiet town like a ghost that refused to rest. Welcome to Criminal Mindcast, the podcast where we tell true crime stories not just with facts, but with silence. With the haunting weight of what was never said. Tonight we revisit Millbrook, Pennsylvania, and the mystery that turned summer light into shadow. This is The Vanishing of Emma Harrison, Millbrook, Pennsylvania, the kind of place that made people believe the world was still good. The town sat quietly between green farmland and the slow silver shimmer of the Susquehanna River. Here, front porches leaned toward each other in conversation. Neighbors waved across white fences. Children rode bicycles down cracked sidewalks, their laughter floating over yards like a familiar song. In Millbrook, nothing ever seemed out of place. It was the sort of town that wore safety like perfume, comforting, invisible, and deeply deceptive. On the surface, it looked like a postcard. One gas station, a church with a bell that kept perfect time, and a grocery store that still sold milk in glass bottles. People talked about crops and weather, not crime. They believed bad things happened elsewhere, in cities they'd only seen on television, not here among the maple trees and porch lights. But safety, as time would prove, is often an illusion. In 1977, the Harrisons lived on Sycamore Drive, a narrow street where each house had the same soft glow in its windows after dusk. Robert Harrison, a factory worker, left for the steel mill before sunrise every morning. He was the kind of man who believed that decency was simple. Show up, work hard, love your family, and everything else would follow. Carol, his wife, worked part-time at the hardware store downtown. She had a calm voice and an unshakable kindness that made her a favorite among neighbors. And then there was Emma Rose, their only child, 3 years old. Emma was the town's little burst of sunlight. She had a crooked smile with a tiny gap in her teeth, a habit of naming every stray cat she saw Mr. Whiskers, and a voice that always sounded like she was discovering the world for the first time. She loved red balloons, peanut butter sandwiches, and bedtime stories about the moon. People who knew her said she carried joy like it was something she had been born holding. That June, the Pattersons, neighbors 6 houses down, were planning a small backyard birthday party for their daughter, Jennifer. Lemonade, cake, folding chairs, and paper streamers that rippled in the summer breeze. It was the kind of gathering Millbrook did best. Simple, familiar, filled with laughter. On the morning of June 14th, 1977, Carol dressed Emma in red shorts, a white t-shirt with a rainbow across the chest, and her favorite pink sandals. "You look like sunshine," Carol said, brushing a curl from Emma's forehead. Emma twirled once in front of the mirror, giggling. When Carol dropped her off at the Pattersons' yard, everything looked perfect. The smell of grass, the sound of birthday songs, the easy hum of small-town trust. A few hours, Carol thought. She'd pick Emma up before dinner. That illusion of safety would last exactly one afternoon. Millbrook in the 1970s was a reflection of America's collective denial. Across the country, the age of innocence was ending, a rising tide of missing children, serial offenders, and shifting fear creeping into the headlines. But those headlines didn't reach Millbrook. Parents still trusted their neighbors, their mailmen, and the friendly workers fixing power lines. The word predator hadn't yet become part of everyday vocabulary. Psychologists later called it normalcy bias, the brain's refusal to acknowledge danger because it threatens our illusion of control. In Millbrook, it was everywhere. The town's peace wasn't just real, it was performed. Doors were left unlocked, not out of ignorance, but faith. Faith that goodness was stronger here, that nothing dark could cross their fence lines. Yet Carol had begun to feel something she couldn't name. In the weeks before the party, she'd stand by Emma's doorway at night, watching her sleep, her small chest rising and falling under the soft hum of the night fan. Sometimes she'd feel an ache, Not fear exactly, but an unease that whispered, "Something is coming." She'd read about a child who had gone missing in Ohio and brushed the thought away, telling herself, "That's not us. That's not here." By afternoon, the warmth was golden, heavy with the smell of lilacs and grass clippings. The Pattersons' yard buzzed with noise. Children chasing each other, parents laughing, someone pouring lemonade into plastic cups. Balloons bobbed lazily above the fence. Everything was ordinary. And yet, if you looked closely, small irregularities rippled beneath the calm. A white service van idled too long at the corner. A man in a utility uniform lingered by the telephone pole across the street, his back turned to the crowd. But no one noticed. Why would they? It was a birthday party, and Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone belonged. That was how evil slipped in. Not through chaos, but through familiarity. Later, people would remember fragments, a flicker of reflection in the van's windshield, the sound of a child's laughter cutting off mid-breath, a mother glancing toward the street and seeing nothing unusual, just the gentle hum of a summer day. At 2:47 p.m., someone realized Emma was no longer in the yard. The red balloon she'd been holding was found drifting along the fence, caught in the slats like a bright, helpless warning. But that's another part of the story. For now, what matters is understanding the illusion Millbrook lived under. They mistook calm for safety, quiet for peace. They thought danger had a face, rough, loud, unfamiliar. They never imagined it could wear a smile, hold a clipboard, or wave politely before driving away. When the truth came, it didn't arrive with thunder. It came softly, like the click of a closing door. Years later, survivors of that summer would describe Millbrook as a place too perfect to survive itself. Every photograph from 1977 feels like a countdown now. Mothers laughing, children in paper hats, fathers tending grills. Each smile a moment, frozen one breath before it broke. Because the truth about small towns is this: their beauty is their blindness. The sunlight hides the shadow until it's too late to look away. And on that warm June afternoon, as the sound of laughter drifted into the blue Pennsylvania sky, Millbrook still believed it was safe. They didn't yet know that by nightfall, their illusion and their innocence would be gone forever. June 14th, 1977. A Tuesday so ordinary it should have vanished into memory. The sun hung high over Millbrook, scattering gold light through the maple leaves. The Patterson yard pulsed with laughter, the kind that belongs only to children, wild and untamed. Balloons swayed, popsicles melted. Someone turned on a radio playing Fleetwood Mac, and for a while, the world felt unbreakable. Carol Harrison stood by the fence, watching her daughter dart across the grass, her blonde curls catching sunlight. "Mommy, look at me!" Emma shouted, twirling, her red balloon bobbing behind her. Carol smiled. She had no reason to think that moment would be the last she'd ever see her child alive. At 4 p.m., Carol told Emma she needed to run home, just for a few minutes. A favor for a neighbor, nothing more. She kissed her daughter's cheek and said softly, "Be good, sweet pea, Mommy will be right back." Emma nodded, gripping her balloon. When Carol returned 20 minutes later, everything looked the same. Children laughing, parents chatting, the smell of grilled hot dogs in the air. But Emma was gone. At first it didn't register as fear, just confusion. Carol checked the sandbox, the swing set under the table. She called Emma's name once, then again, louder. No answer. A parent suggested maybe she'd wandered home. Carol ran, barefoot, heart-pounding, calling her daughter's name into the empty air. The door was unlocked, as always. Inside, the toys sat untouched. The house felt wrong, too still, too quiet. By 5:10 p.m., the first call went to the Millbrook Police Department. The dispatcher spoke with calm professionalism, unaware that the town's peace had just cracked in half. 3-year-old female, blonde hair, approximately 30 pounds, missing since around 4:30. Within minutes, the first patrol car rolled down Sycamore Drive, its lights flashing silently. Officers fanned out across backyards, calling Emma's name into the warm summer air. No one knew it yet, but in that single hour between sunlight and dread, Millbrook Air's illusion of safety had vanished, carried away as quietly as a red balloon drifting into the sky. When Patrolman Dale McKenna arrived at the Patterson home, the scene was confusion wrapped in denial. Neighbors were fanning out with flashlights, though the sun had not yet set. Some called her name through the nearby woods. Others searched cars, garages, even under porches. Carol stood on the front lawn, trembling, her fingers clutching Emma's small pink sandal, found near the fence. It's remarkable how fast time fractures in moments like that. Minutes stretch into lifetimes. Sound becomes distortion. Carol's memory of that hour would later come in flashes. The taste of metal in her mouth, the way the shadows seemed to lengthen too fast, the sense that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. By sunset, nearly half the town was searching. The police established a 1-mile perimeter, though it would later be criticized as far too small. Bloodhounds were brought in from Harrisburg, their handlers following faint trails through the wooded area behind the Pattersons' property. The scent led to a dirt access road and then abruptly stopped. The only evidence found that night was the balloon string, tangled in a patch of grass near the fence line. Detective Alan Brewer, who would later lead the investigation, arrived around 8 p.m. He was 41 years old, a man with deep-set eyes and the weary calm of someone who had already seen too much. Brewer's first impression was simple. This wasn't a child who wandered off. He noted how contained the area was, how every possible exit would have required an adult's help or a vehicle waiting nearby. He asked the standard questions. Who saw her last? What was she wearing? Who had been at the party? But answers blurred together. Parents contradicted one another. One claimed she saw Emma near the sandbox at 4:20. Another insisted she'd been eating cake closer to 4:30. The confusion was understandable, but it also meant that the timeline, that crucial, fragile thread, was already unraveling. As night fell, Millbrook transformed. Floodlights carved harsh white circles across lawns, stretching shadows into something almost alive. Police searched every ditch, shed, and back road, while volunteers moved through the woods with flashlights trembling in their hands. Each rustle of leaves sparked hope, then fear, then silence. By 11:42 p.m., the search was called off until dawn. But Carol refused to leave. She sat on the Patterson porch steps, arms around herself, whispering her daughter's name again and again, as if the sound alone could summon her back. When morning came, reporters arrived. Headlines spread across Pennsylvania. Millbrook girl, 3, missing after birthday party. A small town's nightmare had just begun. Within 24 hours, state troopers, FBI agents, and journalists flooded the town. Strangers arrived offering help, some genuine, others drawn by morbid curiosity. The Harrisons' home turned into a command center, phone lines buzzing, photographs copied, maps spread across the dining table. And yet, despite the resources, no trace of Emma was found. No fibers, no footprints, no witnesses who could describe a suspicious vehicle. It was as if the earth had opened for a second, swallowed her whole, and sealed itself again. For the first time, Millbrook understood fear, not as a concept, but as a constant companion. Parents clutched their children tighter. Doors that had always been left unlocked began to close. The town's rhythm faltered. Church bells rang hollow, laughter disappeared from porches, and every child's giggle carried the ghost of Emma Harrison. That day, June 14, 1977, ended not with sunset, but with silence. A silence that would stretch across decades, echoing through empty playgrounds, through news reports, through the unhealed hearts of a town that could never quite forgive itself. That day, Millbrook lost more than a child. It lost its innocence, its faith in safety, in the comforting illusion that evil belonged elsewhere. The town's laughter turned to whispers, its light dimmed by something it could not name. And somewhere, in the space between what was known and what was feared, the truth remained, silent, buried, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. Detective Leonard Marsh joined the Millbrook Police Department in 1978, nearly a year after Emma Harrison vanished. He inherited the case from Detective Brewer, who had suffered a breakdown after months of failure and public pressure. Marsh was different, quiet, methodical, and almost unnervingly calm. He believed that evil wasn't chaos, it was structure. It left traces, patterns, echoes, if you were patient enough to listen. He began by revisiting every interview, every photo, every inch of Sycamore Drive. It was an obsession, though he never used that word. To Marsh it was duty, a promise made to a child who couldn't speak anymore. He read through transcripts in silence, making notes in precise handwriting. One line in particular stayed with him: utility worker seen near telephone pole across the street. It was dismissed at the time, routine maintenance, nothing more. But Marsh underlined it anyway. The first real suspect was Eugene Farley, a 32-year-old drifter, who had recently moved into a trailer park outside town. Farley had a prior conviction for indecent exposure involving a minor, which made him an easy target for public outrage. He was questioned twice, his home searched, his alibi checked. It held. He'd been in Scranton that day, over 2 hours away, confirmed by gas station receipts and multiple witnesses. Marsh didn't like the man, but disliking someone wasn't proof. The second suspect was Thomas Walcott, a local mechanic and neighbor who'd attended the birthday party with his own children. Walcott was friendly, talkative, maybe too talkative. Several witnesses claimed he lingered around the kids more than the adults, offering to help with balloons or watch the little ones while the mothers chatted. Police searched his car and found a pink ribbon tangled in the back seat. It matched the one Emma had worn in her hair, but the test results were inconclusive. No DNA, no definitive link. Walcott maintained his innocence until the day he died in 1993. The lack of answers bred suspicion like rot. Rumors spread faster than facts. People whispered about satanic cults, traveling carnivals, child trafficking rings, all fueled by fear and the rising national panic around missing children in the late 1970s. For every lead Marsh followed, 3 more appeared, each one ending in the same cold place, nowhere. Meanwhile, the Harrisons unraveled. Carol carried unbearable guilt for leaving her daughter that afternoon. She replayed those 20 minutes endlessly, the errand, the quick goodbye, the decision she could never undo. She withdrew from friends, stopped attending church, and began sleeping in Emma's untouched room, surrounded by stuffed animals and fading wallpaper. Her husband Robert turned to the only thing he could control: work. He picked up extra shifts at the factory, sometimes staying overnight, sometimes not coming home at all. The silence between them grew heavier than grief itself. By the early 1980s, Emma S. photo had become part of a grim collage, one of many faces printed on milk cartons and supermarket flyers. Her smile, once radiant, was now a symbol of collective failure. "Have you seen me?" the captions asked. But no one had, not really. Detective Marsh continued to chase shadows. He interviewed parolees, transient workers, even passing truck drivers. Each time he thought he felt the pulse of truth, it faded. He began to dream about the case, a small hand reaching toward him from the dark, a voice whispering numbers he couldn't understand. His colleagues said he was losing perspective. Marsh disagreed. "Losing perspective," he said once in a rare interview, "is often the first step toward finding clarity." In 1985, an anonymous letter arrived at the police station. It read, "Check the man who fixes phones. No signature. No return address." The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged. Marsh requested maintenance records from the utility company, but they were incomplete. The company claimed to have no record of any worker assigned to Sycamore Drive on June 14th. TISP-7. It was another thread that seemed to lead nowhere, and yet Marsh couldn't forget it. As the years passed, the town changed. New families moved in, old ones left, and the story of Emma Harrison faded into local legend, a cautionary tale told to keep children close to home. But for those who remembered, time didn't dull the wound. Carol kept Emma's birthday every year, baking a small cake, lighting a single candle, then letting it burn out on its own. Robert stopped attending. The marriage ended quietly in 1989. By 1992, the case was officially cold. Marsh retired 2 years later. When he cleaned out his desk, he left one thing behind: Emma's file placed carefully in the center drawer. He couldn't bear to take it home, but he couldn't throw it away either. The 1990s and early 2000s brought new technology, DNA testing, digital records, and national offender databases. Each advancement reopened old wounds for families of the missing. Yet Emma's case remained unsolved. Evidence degraded, witnesses died, memories blurred. The only constants were the pain and the silence. Still, something strange happened in Millbrook. Over time, the tragedy became part of the town's identity, a shadow woven into its history. A few residents claimed to see Emma's ghost near Sycamore Drive, a small figure in white standing by the fence at dusk. Others said it was just imagination, a way to explain lingering guilt. But guilt, like grief, has its own shape. The Stoics believed that the world is neither cruel nor kind. It simply is. Suffering, they said, is not punishment but perception. Yet when a child disappears, philosophy offers little comfort. The mind seeks reason where none exists. It builds monsters to explain emptiness because emptiness is unbearable. For Detective Marsh, that emptiness became his legacy. He died in 2012, never knowing how close he had come. Because within the old utility files, boxed, mislabeled and forgotten, was the name of a temporary worker who clocked in on June 14, 1977, but never logged out. For decades, the file gathered dust, until one detective, 40 years later, decided to open it again. And what she found would rewrite everything they thought they knew. In 2019, Detective Sarah Brennan joined the Pennsylvania Cold Case Unit. She was 34, deliberate, and possessed that rare combination of empathy and precision that made her both respected and quietly feared. She believed the past was never dead, only buried beneath bureaucracy, forgotten paperwork and human fatigue. One night, while reviewing old case indexes, she found a box labeled Harrison Emma Miscellaneous Leads. It had been misfiled under Harris E. Inside were weathered photographs, brittle notes, and one line that caught her attention. Utility worker seen near telephone pole across street. No record of assignment. It was written in Marsh's careful handwriting, underlined twice. Most officers would have dismissed it as noise, but Brennan didn't believe in coincidences. She cross-checked the 1977 utility company logs and noticed something unusual. A technician ID C. Lyle had clocked out at 2:15 p.m., yet eyewitness accounts placed a man wearing a similar uniform near the Patterson home just after 4:00. The name meant nothing at first, but when she ran it through the federal offender database, the past snapped into focus. Curtis Edwin Lyle, convicted in 1985 for the abduction of a 6-year-old girl in Ohio, served 15 years, released in 2000. He had once worked for Keystone Telephone Services, the same contractor servicing Millbrook in the late 1970s. The pattern was disturbingly clear. Lyle had operated in small towns, always under the guise of maintenance work. He blended into routine, climbing poles, checking lines, waving at children. His presence registered as safe because it looked official. People trust uniforms, they trust the ordinary. It's the oldest trick in the psychology of predation. Hide in plain sight. Brennan traced his address to a small isolated property on the outskirts of Erie, Pennsylvania. The man was 70 now, frail but lucid. When she knocked on his door, the sound echoed against the stillness, like something breaking. He opened it slowly, eyes cloudy but alert. On the wall behind him hung a framed newspaper clipping. Local man honored for volunteer work. The irony almost felt scripted. The interview began politely. Brennan asked about his work in the 1970s, about Millbrook, about whether he remembered anything unusual on June 14, 1977. Lyle smiled faintly, his gaze drifting toward the window. "That was a long time ago," he said. "I've fixed a lot of wires since then." She asked if he still had his old toolkits. He said he did. With his consent, investigators searched his shed. What they found inside was quiet horror. Boxes of photographs, carefully labeled and dated, some showing telephone poles, others showing children playing in yards. Most were harmless, but some weren't. Among the boxes was a small paper bag discolored by time. Inside lay a pink sandal, size 6 toddler, the brand discontinued since the late 1970s. Alongside it, a faded newspaper clipping about Emma Harrison's disappearance. The silence that followed that discovery was suffocating. DNA analysis confirmed the impossible. The sandal had traces of Emma's mitochondrial DNA, preserved by luck and circumstance. Forensic evidence finally bridged 44 years of uncertainty. When confronted, Lyle didn't deny it. not directly. Instead, he spoke in riddles. "Children trust the ones who climb," he murmured. "They think you're fixing the world." His words carried no remorse, only emptiness, the kind of void psychologists describe as affective absence, a condition where empathy never forms. He wasn't rage or impulse, he was vacancy made human. In 2021, Curtis Lyle was arrested and charged with the abduction and murder of Emma Harrison. The trial drew national attention, not for its spectacle, but for its quiet weight. The courtroom felt frozen in time, faces aged by decades of waiting. Carol Harrison, now in her 70s, attended every day, her hands clasped around a locket containing Emma's photograph. During testimony, Detective Brennan described the years of neglect the case endured, the false leads, the overlooked clue about the telephone worker. Her words were measured, calm, almost tender, a tribute to those who refused to forget. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, Carol closed her eyes, exhaled, and whispered, "Thank you." It was not triumph, it was release. Psychologists studying Lyle's profile noted an absence of escalation. Unlike many offenders, his crimes were sporadic, opportunistic, not driven by compulsion, but by circumstance. That unpredictability made him invisible. He moved through society like static in a phone line, always there, never noticed. There's something profoundly unsettling about that. Evil, as philosophers have long said, rarely presents itself as monstrous. It arrives wearing a smile, holding a toolbox, waving from across the street. The Stoics believed that virtue is vigilance, that moral blindness, not malevolence, is what allows cruelty to thrive. In Millbrook, people didn't fail because they were bad. They failed because they didn't want to imagine that badness could live so close. When asked years later what drove her to reopen the case, Brennan replied simply, "Because silence is a kind of consent." Her answer reflected a deeper truth. Justice is not about winning. It's about bearing witness, about naming the darkness even when it's too late to stop it. Emma's body was never found. The location Lyle claimed to have left her to rest yielded nothing but soil and silence. But her story didn't end there. Public outrage over the case led to Emma's Law, a legislative reform mandating stricter background checks for utility and contract workers entering residential areas. The law passed unanimously in 2022. Every June 14th, residents of Millbrook gather at Sycamore Drive for a small vigil. There's no spectacle, just candles, photographs, and a wooden bench facing the spot where the Patterson yard once stood. The plaque reads, "Taken too soon, never forgotten." At sunset, the light filters through the telephone wires overhead, humming faintly in the wind. Some say it's just electricity, others say it's memory, because in the end, Emma's story is not only about loss, it's about how truth waits, how it endures under the noise of decades, beneath paper, beneath doubt, and sometimes, when the wires hum just right, it speaks. Evil rarely begins as a roar. Sometimes it starts as silence, the pause between laughter and disappearance, the moment when no one is watching. The story of Emma Harrison is not just about a crime. It is about what happens when innocence meets indifference, when trust becomes the weapon used against it. For 44 years, a small town lived with unanswered questions, haunted not by screams but by the absence of sound. And yet, in that silence, something sacred endured. Persistence. The quiet, relentless work of those who refused to look away, who believed that even after decades, truth still mattered. Justice came late. Too late for Emma, but not for what she symbolized. The fragile hope that even in the ruins of time, light can still reach the forgotten. If this story moved you, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more forgotten cases brought back into the light. Because some crimes leave no screams, only questions, and some silences echo louder than any confession. Thank you for listening to Criminal Mindcast.